All right, let's kick things off. Imagine this. You're on a highway in India, maybe late 2024, early 2025. It's dusty, and you hear that familiar sound and the rumble of trucks, big ones, the kind that, well, keep the country running.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That sound, that image, it's been dominated by diesel engines for, gosh, decades now. Diesel's been the absolute king.
Exactly, the king. But, and this is the interesting part we're diving into today, it seems like the king's reign might be facing a bit of a challenge. Things were looking a little shaky up there on the throne.
It's a huge deal to even suggest that, isn't it? Diesel has been so fundamental to power transport, industry, agriculture. It really fueled India's growth story for so long. So, yeah, any shift is pretty significant.
Totally. So we're going deep into India's diesel story for the fiscal year ending March 2025. And the big surprise, demand growth has really slowed down quite a bit. Not falling off a cliff, mind you, but definitely sluggish.
Right. A slowdown, not a collapse,
Yeah.
but still a marked change.
And the reasons behind it, that's where it gets really fascinating. So this isn't just about numbers on a page. We want to unpack the economic factors, sure, but also this like quiet challenger that's emerging.
The goal being to give everyone a clear picture of what's actually happening on the ground in India's energy sector and, importantly, why it matters.
Precisely, because context, as always, is key. Diesel's dominance has been immense.
Oh, absolutely. If you look at the data, say, from the Petroleum Planning and Analysis Cell, the PPA folks who track this stuff closely, diesel still accounts for something like 40% of India's total oil use. That's huge.
20%. It's a massive slice. But here's the kicker. The demand growth in this last fiscal year, just 2%. 2% hitting about 91.4 million tons.
Okay, 2% on its own, maybe it doesn't sound earth-shattering, but you have to compare it,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. That's the whole point.
Right.
You look back just 1 year to FY 2023-24, and growth was 4.3%, much
Hey,
healthier.
right.
And the year before that, FY 2022-23, it was a massive surge, 12.1% growth.
Wow. Yeah. So going from over 12% down to 4%, then down to just 2%, that's a very clear trend, a rapid deceleration.
It really is, like hitting the brakes quite hard. So the immediate question is, what's putting the brakes on?
Well, part of it has to be the broader economic picture. India's economy has been growing, definitely, but perhaps not at that kind of explosive pace we saw in some previous periods. Steady, but maybe not spectacular, that naturally tempers fuel demand overall.
That makes sense. Slower economic expansion means, maybe less frantic activity in some sectors. But is that the whole story? I feel like there's something else going on, too.
I think you're right. While the economy is a factor, it doesn't fully explain that sharp drop-off for diesel specifically. There's another major player entering the scene, sort of quietly disrupting things.
And that would be
Electric vehicles.
These. Their rise is starting to have a tangible impact, especially on diesel demand.
okay. Because the transport sector has just been so reliant on diesel, hasn't it?
Absolutely. Think about it. Roughly three-quarters of the fuel used in transport has traditionally been diesel. All those long-haul trucks crisscrossing the country, the tractors in the fields. Diesel was the lifeblood.
Right. But now, especially in cities, you're really starting to see the change.
You are. Look at public transport. Cities like Delhi, Mumbai, you see more and more electric buses on the roads now. They're not just pilots anymore. They're actively replacing older diesel buses.
Delhi's got that ambitious goal, right? Something like 25% electric public buses by 2025.
Exactly. And Mumbai's Best is also significantly expanding its electric fleet. These are direct substitutions. One electric bus replaces one diesel bus. That's a direct hit on diesel demand in those urban centers.
And it's not just the big buses, is it? What about smaller vehicles?
Good point. Look at Tier 2, Tier 3 cities, places like Varanasi or Coimbatore. You're seeing a huge boom in electric auto rickshaws, e-rickshaws.
E-rickshaws, yeah. They seem to be everywhere in some places.
They are. And for the drivers, the economics often work out better in the long run, lower running costs, So they're rapidly displacing the older diesel autos for those shorter last-mile trips.
Okay, so buses in big cities, rickshaws and smaller ones. What about goods? Deliveries?
That too. Think about all the online shopping deliveries. Major companies, Amazon, Flipkart, Big Basket, they're actively shifting their delivery fleets to EVs.
So those vans bringing packages are increasingly electric. Silent little things zipping around.
Precisely, it's happening.
Yeah.
So while diesel is still crucial for the big, long-distance trucks and heavy farm machinery, these shifts in urban public transport, last-mile connectivity, and city logistics, they're adding up. They're creating a noticeable drag on overall diesel growth.
It's interesting then to look at how other fuels are doing. Because while diesel is slowing, petrol or gasoline is actually doing pretty well.
Right, that's a key contrast. Petrol consumption was up, what, about 7.5% in the same period, making 40 million tons?
Yeah, 7.5%, a much healthier number. So
Yeah.
why the difference?
Well, it mainly comes down to personal vehicles, scooters, cars. Most people still drive petrol-powered vehicles. The EV transition just hasn't hit that personal ability segment as hard yet.
Okay, that makes sense. So petrol demand is still strong. What about other fuels, like LPG for cooking?
LPG saw solid growth too, around 5.6%, hitting over 31 million tons. It remains absolutely essential for households across India.
And jet fuel. I heard aviation was booming.
It certainly seems so. Jet fuel demand jumped nearly 9%, reaching 9 million tons. That directly reflects more people flying for business, tourism, pilgrimages. You see it at busy airports like Bengaluru or Tirupati.
So lots of growth in petrol, LPG, jet fuel.
Yeah.
But were any fuels seeing a decline?
Yes, a few. Naphtha, which goes into petrochemicals, was down almost 5%. Fuel oil used in some industries dipped slightly, nearly 1%.
And bitumen for roads.
Bitumen was down over 5% as well, which, as you said, might suggest maybe a slightly slower pace for some road construction projects during that period.
Interesting. So those industrial and construction-linked fuels showing some softness maybe ties back to that steady but not explosive economic growth we talked about.
Could well be. If factories aren't running full pelt or big infra projects are pacing themselves, you'd expect demand for those specific fuels to ease off a bit.
Although, paradoxically, some other industrial fuels did grow.
Right. Petroleum coke used in cement and power plants was up over 8%. And lubricants, needed for all sorts of machinery, saw a big jump, over 12%.
Okay, so it's a complex picture, not just one single trend across the board.
Exactly. Different sectors, different dynamics. But when you zoom out, look at the total consumption of all petroleum products.
It still grew, right, by about 2.1%, reaching around 239 million tons overall.
It did grow, but, and this is the really crucial context, that 2.1% overall growth. If you exclude the really weird pandemic years, it's the slowest growth in India's total oil demand in a decade.
Wow, okay. So that really frames the diesel slowdown. It's part of a broader, more sluggish overall demand picture, the slowest in 10 years, pandemic aside.
Precisely. It underlines that something more fundamental is likely happening beyond just normal economic cycles. And the finger points pretty strongly towards the impact of EVs gaining traction, particularly hitting diesel.
Right. So let's really dig into that why a bit more. We've got the economic backdrop, steady growth, not booming, which affects industrial and construction diesel use. That's factor one.
Definitely. Less demand for diesel generators, heavy machinery. It all adds up when activity isn't at peak levels.
Factor two, the big one, the EV revolution. We can't stress that enough, can we?
Not really. And it's being actively encouraged, isn't it? Government support, subsidies for things like electric buses, pushing for more charging stations, it all helps build momentum.
Yeah, the policy side is definitely playing a role, making it easier and maybe cheaper to go electric, especially for fleet operators.
And that ties into the urban shift. For e-rickshaw drivers, it's often about lower running costs. For logistics firms using electric vans, same calculation. Better economics drives adoption alongside the environmental angle.
And didn't cleaner fuel standards also make diesel vehicles more expensive? The BSVI norms.
Yes, that's another piece. BSVI made diesel engines more complex and costly to manufacture, and sometimes to maintain. That higher upfront cost can tip the balance towards alternatives like petrol or increasingly electric.
Plus the whole general push toward renewables like solar power. It all contributes to a mindset shift away from traditional fossil fuels over time.
So it's this mix, isn't it? Moderate economic pace, the very real and accelerating EV adoption in key segments, supportive policies, and the higher cost of new diesel tech. They're all working together to slow down diesel's growth.
Okay, so that's the situation now. What about looking ahead? What are the projections for the next fiscal year, 2025-26?
Well, the PPAC forecast suggests they expect a bit of a pickup. They're projecting overall oil demand to grow by around 5.7%, hitting nearly 253 million tons.
Okay, 5.7% overall. That sounds healthier than 2.1%. What about diesel specifically within that?
For diesel, they're only forecasting about 3% growth, reaching maybe 94.1 million tons. So still growing, but quite modestly.
Only 3% for diesel, while the overall growth is nearly 6%. That's telling.
It is. And look at petrol, they expect that to continue strong, maybe growing around 6.5% to over 42 million tons.
So the trend continues. Petrol strong, diesel lagging behind the overall average.
Pretty much. It really suggests that diesel isn't likely to regain that dominant growth position it once held. The EV factor seems structural now, not just a blip.
Especially with goals like the National Electric Mobility Mission aiming for, what was it, 30% EVs by 2030?
That's the target. It's ambitious, no doubt, but you have major domestic players like Tata Motors, Ola Electric really pushing hard on EVs now. The momentum is building.
And are there other fuels on the horizon? Things like hydrogen or biofuels?
Definitely ones to watch. Green hydrogen, various biofuels. They're still in earlier stages in terms of widespread use in India, but they're part of the longer term conversation about alternatives to fossil fuels, potential future disruptors.
Okay, let's try and make this a bit more human. All these tons of percentages.
Hmm.
How does it affect real people? Let's imagine, say, Rajesh. He's a truck driver, maybe based in Rajasthan, drives a big diesel rig across the country. That's his life.
For someone like Rajesh, this whole shift must bring a lot of uncertainty, right? He's hearing about electric trucks, maybe sees potential fuel savings, but worries about the costs, the charging network on long routes, learning new maintenance.
Yeah, it's his livelihood. It's not just abstract economics. It's potentially changing his whole way of working. It must feel, yeah, unsettling maybe, even if there are potential upsides.
Absolutely. It requires adaptation, new skills, trusting new technology. It's a big shift for people whose careers were built around diesel.
Now contrast that with, let's say, Priya. She drives an auto rickshaw in maybe Bhopal. A year ago, she switched from a diesel auto to an e-rickshaw.
Ah, okay. Her experience is likely quite different. She's probably already seeing the benefits, right?
Probably. Lower daily costs no spending a huge chunk of earnings on diesel. It's quieter, cleaner. For her, the transition might feel much more positive, more immediate in its benefits.
And stories like Priya's are becoming more and more common, especially in cities and towns. It really grounds these big trends. It shows the direct impact, financial, environmental, on individuals making a living.
So we're bringing it back to our listeners.
Hmm.
Why should all this matter to them? It might feel a bit distant, this talk of millions of tons of fuel.
Well, for starters, fuel prices affect almost everything. The cost of transporting goods impacts the price of groceries, clothes, everything. So a shift in demand patterns for major fuels like diesel could potentially influence prices at the pump eventually.
Could influence, but no guarantees, right?
Yep.
Lots of factors affect fuel prices.
Exactly, manage expectations. But it's a factor. More directly, though, think about the environment. More EVs, fewer diesel vehicles, especially in cities, means cleaner air. That's a direct benefit to everyone's health.
Good point. Cleaner air is something everyone can appreciate.
And longer term, as EV technology matures and becomes more widespread, it could lead to cheaper transportation options overall, lower energy costs, potentially lower maintenance.
So maybe next time someone's thinking about buying a vehicle, it's worth seriously looking at the electric options. Not just for the planet, but maybe for their wallet too, down the line.
It's definitely becoming a more viable and attractive option for more people, worth considering a total cost of ownership and the benefits.
So wrapping this up, it feels like this period, FY 2024-25, really marks a significant moment, doesn't it? A turning point in India's energy story.
It really does. That slowdown in diesel growth, the slowest in a decade, barring the pandemic, driven so clearly by the rise of EVs, it signals a real shift. The energy landscape is just so dynamic now.
Yeah, the old certainties are fading. You used the analogy of a Bollywood film earlier. The established star, Diesel, is still there. But there are exciting new protagonists like EVs really starting to share the spotlight.
It's a great way to put it. And it leaves us all with something to think about, doesn't it? What are the wider ripple effects of this energy transition going to be for India's economy, for the environment, and just for our everyday lives?
That's the big question.
Yeah.
Maybe something for everyone to ponder. As you go about your day, maybe notice the different vehicles on the road, see if you spot more EVs, more charging points. It's all part of the story we've been exploring.